Welcome to the Best Hopes podcast. My name is Adam Frower.
And I'm Cecil Walker.
And today we want to talk a little bit about how do we change the amount of hope that we have. If you tuned in last time, you'll know that we talked about lots of different synonyms of hope and all the different aspects of hope, and we're going to come back to that several times. But in this episode, we want to consider, can you change, and if so, how do you change the amount of hope that you have? So since I am always the first one to talk, I'm going to throw out my big grand question to Cecil, and he's going to enlighten us with his brilliance. So Cecil, let's just start with the big question. Can you change the amount of hope you've got?
I actually think that's the easier of the potential questions here, because that's just a yes or no.
Okay, I'll follow up.
No need. I would say yes, you can change the amount of hope that you have. And I feel pretty certain of that because I know, and I think everyone knows and has experienced, that the amount of hope, and I think you can exchange hope with a lot of these other words that we've talked about, over the past season, faith and trust and ambition and all these kinds of things that we've talked about. Everyone has experienced different levels of those things in different circumstances or time periods, which means that it's an affirmative. Yes, it can change because it does change. We feel different amounts of those things given different circumstances or I'm in a different age. I'm in a different moment in my life. I've just experienced something that heightened or lowered that thing. Maybe I see things around me differently. I'm defining myself differently. Whatever, who knows how many different factors there might be involved. But we've all seen how we can be in a moment where I feel actually very hopeful for the future or for this thing that I'm working at, versus there are moments where I'm less sure of how this thing is going to work out, or how good the odds look for me, or how much faith I feel like I have in this thing kind of making its way towards a desirable outcome. So yeah, I rest my case. An easy yes.
Okay, so I do agree with you. Hope can change. But I'm going to nuance my question a little bit, because can hope change is different than can you change the amount of hope you've got. So lots of circumstances might change and that might impact hope. But can you, or can I as an individual, can I do something to impact the amount of hope I've got?
In a lot of ways, yeah, I would still say yes. That is a slightly trickier question, but I still stand.
There's more where that came from.
I thought this was going to be like the super short episode where we just say yes twice and move on. I do think you can change how much hope you have. And part of that answer is because I think at all moments we're the ones in charge of our mindset, of how we're processing and understanding things. And it might not always feel like that, but I do think we are like the beholders of what we're making of things. So I think that gives us quite a tremendous amount of power, especially over something like how much hope we have for what's happening, where we're going, what we're doing. So that's part of why I think yes. But the other part is I don't think hope just falls from the sky, that like it just happened to be a sunny day and that's why I feel hopeful, or I won the lottery and so now I think there's possibilities in life. I don't think it has to just be sprung at you, and that's where hope comes from. I think the people who are the most hopeful and probably the most consistently hopeful, a bit unconditionally and unattached from what's happening to them, those people probably think a certain kind of a way and do certain kinds of things and talk to themselves in certain kinds of ways. So I don't think it's chance or it's random or it's, whatever. I think there is some kind of agency in the people who experience certain amounts of hope versus, I'm guessing, people who feel less hopeful probably feel like they have less agency too.
Okay, so I have about a bazillion questions.
I only want the easy ones.
And I'm just going to keep asking you questions so that you can't ask me questions. So that's
what you think.
That's the way
That's
the way this is going to go. But my question is, if that's the case, if we can personally impact our hope because of our outlook on things, all the things that you just laid out beautifully, does that then insinuate that people who are feeling hopeless, it's their own fault?
Only if you're trying to twist my words.
My questions are getting harder and harder. I should be a journalist now.
Yeah, you should. I didn't realize I was sitting down with 60 minutes with Adam. No, I don't think it's your fault you feel hopeless or you feel whatever kind of, negative thing that you're feeling. Because I actually think it's a very human response to, if you're in a situation or you're seeing something and for whatever reason that gives you this regard of, or this emotional experience of, this is a bad thing and I feel bad and I feel like what's coming next is worse off now or whatever. I think that's very human to react in that kind of a way. But what I'm saying is that there are, at any moment, there are things available to us in a kind of abstract sense. There are ways of seeing yourself and the situation that they're there. There's a potential for grabbing up more sense of, here's a way forward. Here's what I can do or can think or can feel or see. Here's some meaning making I can try to make out of what's going on and what experiences are happening. These are just options. These are things that are just on the table. And like I said, I think it's very human for us to either not notice those things or to say, well, I'm a bit busy right now with what I'm feeling. And that feeling is something much more negative. So I can't really feel like I can pick up, whatever those other options are. So they might feel out of reach. They might feel maybe even inappropriate at the moment. They might feel like, I don't even see those things. I'm saying these are just the things that are available. And I think hope is available in those moments, and all the things that could get you hope are available in those moments. But it's understandable when people feel like they're overwhelmed by some bad thing or difficult thing, to where that's not going to be their first response is, let me reach for the thing that brings me more hope.
Yeah, it's interesting because as you were talking, you began with saying like the feeling is the feeling. And that reminded me of the paper that we wrote together with our colleague, Natalia, which we can link to the show notes at the end of this. But one of the things that we did in that paper is really distinguish like emotion from feeling and feeling from affect. And I think hopefulness or hopelessness oftentimes is affect. It's behavior that results from a particular emotion, a particular feeling. And so as you were talking, that kind of came back to my mind. And you even said, like, I can't help but feel what I feel. Like the feeling just comes. Yeah. And so I think that's true. Like hopelessness or hopefulness, there are just things that come along that impact, I just feel this way or I don't feel this way. But I think that as we went throughout that paper as well, we talked about how you can do something to exacerbate one feeling or another. What you choose to focus on has an impact. How you language it has an impact. And you also just mentioned like meaning making. How I make meaning of things has an impact. And so I think when we become aware of the feelings that just come, then if we take a pause and we say, how do I want to interact with that feeling, I now get to a place of affect. I now get to a place, like you said, using my agency to make a determination of what do I want to do? How do I want to act as a result of this feeling? And so I think sometimes people feel powerless. And I think once you kind of separate feeling and emotion from affect, it kind of illuminates there really is a lot of choice in how much do I want to let this impact me? How do I want to behave as a result of the feeling I've got? And so that was, I think, really useful and enlightening. And then the other piece that came to me too was, we know from like broaden and build theory, there's this upward spiral that can happen. That once I start to see something positive, then I feel something positive. Once I then act on that positive feeling, I start to recognize additional positive things. And so I think that spiral might be very hard and deliberate at first. It might be a real challenge to kind of get that upward spiral going if I'm sitting in a place of hopelessness. But if I work at it, if I strive for it, if I just pay attention just a little bit, if I shift my mind, I can begin that upward spiral. And once I can kind of get it going, it almost becomes like self-feeding.
Yeah.
And so I think that we do have a lot of impact on it, but it's going to be work. It's going to be hard because when you're at the bottom and you feel that hopelessness, just to get around the first spiral of the upward spiral, it takes effort. It's deliberate. It's difficult. And so I don't want to minimize, like when we say, can you impact it? Yeah, you can. But there is effort that goes into the change that happens.
Yeah, all of that you just described kind of gave new language to this thing that we're talking about, where, like I said, I do think it exists there. This is an option. Like you're saying, it's available, but it takes effort to get there. And I think that anything that takes effort, people need good reason to traverse that, to put in the effort and get to that thing that they want. Everybody wants to be, on the good side of the upward spiral. Everybody wants to feel good. Everybody wants to think they've got prospects and the future is hopeful. Everybody, wants to feel that sensation. But I think a lot of people either stop themselves from going there mentally, from thinking about those things, from accessing that mentally, or don't think that's appropriate, that's what they should be thinking about in these times of hard times or when something devastating is happening. Because they don't have reason to. Mm-hmm. They have reason to feel bad, and that's what they're going to feel. They have reason to think things are really gloom right now, or the cost is too high for me to get from where I am to where I'd rather be. They have all these reasons to stay there and to downward spiral even. But when things are going well and people are really satisfied with their life and they're feeling a sense of gratitude, and maybe there's been all these prompts for why they should think highly of themselves and the situation that they're in, it feels like reason to feel that way, reason to be hopeful and to feel good is plentiful. It's right there. But I think that either of these aspects, these ways of looking at things, are accessible at any given moment. And I'm also starting to think that maybe in therapy, part of what we do is digging up the reasons to go this other way, to go to this upward spiral kind of a way, this I feel more of a sense of hope kind of a way. That's what these meaningful conversations, I think, in therapy do, is it helps make those reasons feel like they're front and center. So now I can go put in that effort or at least have a sense of I feel this stuff over on this positive side. So yeah, I guess to that question that you asked, people do have the choice. There's some agency in that, but people are going to go with what feels like this is the reason I have to feel this way. Here's what feels very accessible to me right now in this given moment. Well, while I have the chance, I also want to ask you some questions.
I had a question poised. I was ready for you.
Well, hold on to it, because mine's going to take the rest of the episode. No, I don't know that it will. We're saying, yes, you can change how much hope that you have. We're saying there's agency. But I don't think we've said, the specifics of what do you do with that agency. And you, as the academic, professional, mental health clinician, even a person of personal, I think, agency, you have a lot of intentionality, all of these things. You're an expert by many different factors. Where can people exert this agency that we're saying that they have? Where can they begin to put in the intention of, regardless of what's happening to me or what the situation is, I am trying to acquire more hope. I'm trying to move in this direction of there has to be a way forward toward what I want here. I guess, what do they look at? What do they do? What do they start to use this agency for?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I would say is it begins where you were just talking about, around intentionality. So I think deliberately thinking, evaluating, and saying, okay, where do I want to increase hope? In whatever slice that you want to, right? Whether that's like, I want to be more ambitious, or whether that means like, I want to have this expectancy that I want to move through life with expectancy, or, take any of those other slices that we talked about. Being very thoughtful about like, which element of hope am I trying to develop here? And the reason I think that that's really important is because with those different slices, we went through, I think, 15 different slices. And faith versus purpose versus awaiting for something, the way I need to develop that or grow that is really different. And so I think beginning with evaluating which component, that's an important piece. And then I think it becomes down to evaluating or saying, like, if I started to see myself develop this kind of hope, what would be different about me? And so just, I think, focusing on difference, when we're talking about can hope grow, we need to know, well, what's the sign of growth? What would I notice if growth happened? So you have to have this like developmental peg that you can put in and be like, well, if I do this kind of a thing, or I think this kind of a way, or I behave in that way, then I'll know, okay, my hope is growing. And so I think you used the perfect word, which was intentionality. And then it gets down to, so then how do you go about developing those things? And I think, again, with each slice, it may be slightly different. If I'm trying to develop hope by awaiting in a really intentional way, that's going to be me like developing some patience. That's going to be me developing some resilience or some fortitude. Whereas if I'm going with expectancy, right, there's this like future expectation. So I'm going to say, what can I put in place today that's going to ultimately lead to what I'm expecting will happen? That's a very deliberate, like, action-oriented thing that's very different than patience, resilience. And so I think you have to be thoughtful about, why am I doing that? And you added that meaning making of, if I become really patient or full of ability to await versus becoming full of expectation, it's going to mean something different about me. And so I think we have to get to that meaning level, and that then impacts behavior. And so then I think that's when that upward spiral starts to come of like, okay, first thing I might notice is this. Once I notice that, I'm going to feel excited. I'm going to feel enthusiastic about it. I'm going to feel like, okay, this is working. What's the next thing I want to accomplish? And that's going to spur that upward spiral. The more I become that kind of person, the more I'll see myself achieve. That was a really theoretical response. I hope that was adequate.
More than adequate. And I have a follow-up question, but I think it might actually be housed inside of what you were just saying. You were just describing, once you start to access the meaning behind this and where this would take you, and even all the subdivisions of what you're really looking for in trying to find hope and move in this positive direction, that changes how you feel. That changes just the you that is in this situation. And so that could potentially answer my question. But my question was, right before that, you were describing this takes effort. And I kind of languaged that, it takes, you have to have good reason then to put in that effort. How do people overcome that effort, which could feel like a blockade? It not only am I dealing with some type of negative affect, but now it's going to take work for me to get out of this place that I'm feeling. How do people, overcome that extra cost of, this is what it takes to get to this more positive place?
Yeah, I kind of see it, and I would love your thoughts about it too, because I kind of see it as at least two possibilities. One, if it really does come down to meaning making, then in some sense I would say do anything and then make it mean I'm getting better, right? So if I'm so depressed, if I'm in such a hopeless place that all I do is lay in bed, I just binge Netflix all day long. I just eat junk food all day long. I'm feeling complete despair and hopelessness. Pick any small thing, right? Getting out of bed. That's a sign of hopefulness, but we have to make it mean something. Does that mean that now I have purpose, right? So think first, if I can just get myself out of bed, that will mean such and such. If I stop eating junk food and I start eating carrots, that means something. Mm-hmm. So pick anything that you do differently. If I stay out of the bed, I get up to go to the bathroom and I stay out of bed for an extra 10 minutes. Make that mean something. And the more that we positively attribute meaning to our behavior, the more it gets that spiral started. So I said there's at least two options. The other option is to do it in the reverse order. In some sense, say, I want something to mean this. What do I need to do in order to get that meaning? I want to move on this scale of, like, I feel like I'm at a 0 of hope. I just want to get to a 0.5 of hope. What would I need to do to get to 0.5 of hope? Okay, I would have to do this. What would it mean about me if I did just that, right? So it's almost like you can start at either end. Either do something and make it meaningful, or decide what you want something to mean and then fit the behavior to it. So in some sense, I almost feel like you can't go wrong, because as long as you just start the spiral, that upward spiral, moving in some way, anyway, it can feed into itself.
Yeah, I would say, I think my answer is actually exactly the same. It just came to me in different words, but holding these back to back, it feels like it's the exact same thing. I was thinking the cost of anything seems to feel smaller when it's for the sake of something you really care about, in both abstract terms and I think in literal terms too, because I would literally pay more money for something that I'm going to use a lot, that's really valuable to me, that, maybe for some reason it just really is important. It's for someone, it's a gift for someone, or this is just an important thing to have, like a car or something like that, a place to live. These are things you're going to pay more money for because they're just more significant. But you wouldn't pay the amount you pay for a car, for socks or something like that. Most people.
Those better be really nice socks.
Exactly. They have to have more value for you to feel like that cost is more negligible, I think is a way of describing it. Because if it is really, really important, then I'm less bothered by the effort that it takes to get to where I'm trying to go, to get the thing that I'm trying to get. And like I said, I think that applies even to these more internal things, less concrete things, which, in a way is connected to literal purchases too. I mean, oftentimes we're thinking of the experience we'll have consciously or subconsciously when things cost us quite a lot. I don't want the experience of having to walk everywhere if I don't have a car. I want to experience my life of, it's comfortable enough that I can drive to the places I need to drive to and not have to worry about all the other, hassles that come with not having that car. And similarly, I think if someone could guarantee you, pay this amount and you'll have the best vacation you'll ever experience with your family. Your family will talk about it for the rest of their lives. This will be the happiest you've ever been together on a trip. That someone would be really willing to pay a lot for that. Somehow, if it was guaranteed that it would be that amazing. And so I think when we think about accessing, faith or awaiting ambition, all these different words that, we talked about, the cost might seem high, but when you introduce into the conversation what the cost is for, what are you buying essentially in this, internal transaction, you have to dig up all of that meaningful stuff like you were talking about, because that's going to put that cost into more context and make it seem either more or less worth it or not. Because it has to feel very much like it's worth it for you to give that out. I assume that's what everybody does when they put effort into something or give up some type of cost for something. Is in some way they must have said, this is worth it. I'm going to give this for this thing that I really, really want.
Yeah, and that made me think of two other things. And one was just that mental effort in and of itself. I think sometimes we don't attribute hope to like the mental effort that you just described. But I think just walking through that exercise of like, what does this mean? How much value does this have to me? Where could I put effort so that I get the maximum worth out of something? That in and of itself is a very hopeful exercise. True. It's a demonstration that hope is present. I think that's going back to what we said 1,000 times is hope is a state. It's always present. You can have more or less of it. And just engaging in that thought of where can I put my effort that's going to be the most worth? That's a hope-filled experience. And so I think that's one thing. And then the other thing that kind of came to my mind that we've kind of alluded to several times, but we haven't directly addressed is if you're trying to increase hope, one way to facilitate that is to break it down, to make the unit of measurement smaller. If I, again, going back to that example of like I'm laying in my bed, maybe it's just like, okay, I take the covers off, and that means I'm about to get up. I don't even have to get all the way out of bed, but just attributing meaning to now I take the covers off. That means I'm about to do something. Okay, what does that say about me? So the smaller increments, sometimes when you're at that place where it's just requiring so much effort, it's almost like every fiber of my being has to go into trying to make a difference, trying to change my situation. Lessening the unit of measurement can sometimes be like, okay, at least I did that one thing, or now what's the next tiny little thing that I can get? And even though it's a huge amount of effort, the successes and the meaning that we attribute can come quicker, can fall closer in line with one another, which again might then spur that process along.
Yeah, both of those points that you just made, I think, reveal how much closer something desirable is than you might realize, whether that's hope or, one of these other slices, these other synonyms that we've been talking about is whatever it is that you're kind of looking for and wanting, it's probably much closer than you think. And you just described it in two different ways. How one, the second thing you said was there's smaller bites that you can take, but there's still hope in each of those things. There's still I'm moving towards something in some kind of a way. But the first thing that you said too was that, all this stuff that we've been describing, even just the mental exercise of what we're talking about, even just to ask the questions that we're asking implies hope, which means, if you are saying, if you're trying to answer this question that we threw out of how do I get more hope? How do I change the amount of hope that I have? A person asks that question with them asking that question kind of inherently means they're hoping for, something. I'm hoping for a chance of being able to do something about the situation that I'm in. And if I took the time to ask that question and put in whatever effort it takes to even consider that question, there must be some kind of hope in there. And we say the same thing all the time with therapy, is that someone comes to us for therapy, even if they didn't make the appointment themselves, even if it wasn't originally their idea, but they agreed somehow in the end, they showed up, there must be some kind of hope for either this can actually do something for them, or hope for if I get through with this, the person who made me come here will leave me alone. That'll somehow ease one of the burdens that I have going on. It's just inherently in there. And so I think we can kind of take that premise and apply it as much as possible anywhere. We can say that, if I want to be a hopeful person, but I'm wondering, what does it take to be a hopeful person? What does it take to get more hope? How do I change the amount of hope that I have? We just have to think about, what do hopeful people do? They do probably some of the things that I'm already starting to do. They ask these kinds of questions. They try to say, what can I do that might help increase the amount of hope that I have? Maybe I can go to therapy. Maybe I can read some things online. Maybe I can listen to a podcast. Maybe I can talk to a friend. And then when I get there, what's another step further along? You know, what else would a hopeful person do? What would I do not only if I had an abundance of hope, but I saw myself kind of moving along the scale of getting more and more hope? And I think all these things fit in there, which again kind of rings true with what I said earlier, that it's the outcome you're looking for is closer than you might think, because to be in the process of it kind of implies you have a bit of what you wanted in the first place.
Yeah. What I guess maybe, and this is the final thing, but as you were talking, the thing that came to my mind is, again, just kind of a reiteration of what we just said, but hope is always present. Mm-hmm. If you ask yourself these questions, that's an evidence of hope. If you take one small step, that's an evidence of hope. If you just, again, one of those synonyms that we talked about is a desire. If you just have a desire for something to be different, that's a sign that hope is present. And so in some sense, I think about this whole conversation and I think, can someone increase their level of hope? And the answer is like abundantly yes. Ask yourself any hope-filled question. Mm-hmm. Think about anything you want to be different. Take the smallest little step, and all of those things are evidence of hope is moving you in some way. And then once you begin to move in these little tiny ways, you have the capability then to take bigger steps, to think about bigger questions you want to ask yourself, or to take bigger steps in action that you want to take, or to have a bigger desire or a bigger dream that you want to kind of move toward. Mm-hmm. And so as I just was kind of thinking about the whole conversation, I was like, well, every single thing says, do any tiny bit and your hope is bigger. Yeah,
I totally agree. Which makes all of this feel a lot easier than we might assume, especially if we're thinking from the mindset of things are really, really tough. I'm in a bad place. Life's hard. I'm feeling bad. Outlook isn't looking too great for whatever reason. Those things might convince us. It would take a lot to actually get somewhere good, somewhere nice, somewhere I want to be. But clearly, it's a little easier than we think.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, anything else we need to get to?
Not that I can think of. This was hard.
This was hard. But hopefully that conversation was useful for you. If you know of somebody who could benefit from this minute consideration of hope, if you can think of somebody who needs to benefit from growing their hope, please share this podcast with them, and practice this deliberate, intentional increasing of hope.